Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? We begin with one study of personal hygiene, paper towel, and the CCP virus. The simple summary finds that people using paper towel after they've washed their hands do a better job of cleaning up after themselves than those that use a jet dryer. As it was once described on The Big Bang Theory, hand dryers are less than desirable, especially when it comes to the spread of disease and germs.
Sit over there. Baby wipe?
Why do you have
No, don't!
I'll tell you why.
Oh.
I had to sanitize my hands because the university replaced the paper towels in the restrooms with hot air blowers.
Oh, I thought the blowers were more sanitary.
Right.
Hot air blowers are incubators and spewers of bacteria and pestilence. Frankly, it'd be more hygienic if they just had a plague-infested gibbon sneeze my hands dry.
The study looks at whether or not washing your hands with soap was enough by itself to protect from the CCP virus. The reality is, most people don't wash their hands properly, and as a result, the next steps that follow tend to only make things worse. Using paper towel avoids that issue to some extent. 10 of the 11 tested surfaces found that using a jet dryer produced a far higher deposit of the bacteriophage, which is the virus they were testing, than using paper towel did. In somewhat less depressing news about the CCP virus, all of the people in the public who are running the Folded at Home program have inadvertently created the world's biggest supercomputer. Folding at Home was a program we mentioned some weeks back. It is intended to allow a small part of your computer to be put into a larger system where its processing power can be used to create protein structures, complex calculations, and other processes that would require massive resources if tested outside of a system like this. The entire network is set up with volunteers, and it is helping tackle some of the bigger problems around the CCP virus. The program has gone from roughly 30,000 volunteers giving up part of their processing power to over 700,000. That is a drastic increase in the capacity. It now has a possible 2.4 exaflops. Consider that the newest gaming consoles that are supposed to be cutting edge have roughly 12 teraflops, and 1 million teraflops makes up for 1 exaflop. That's a big difference, and why this arrangement as it is more capable than the combined abilities of the top 500 supercomputers in the world. If you're interested in supporting Folding at Home, either take a look at our video that covered this briefly, or consider the link below to install the software. Either option will give you some detail as to what you are going to be doing and how your participation will help before you agree to download and install the software. In other more controversial news, there's an interesting argument coming from two experts who believe if social distancing measures had been brought in 2 weeks earlier than they were, about 90% of the current deaths associated with the CCP virus could have been avoided. Of course, everybody has 20/20 hindsight, and knowing this now rather than at the time isn't going to help anyone in dealing with what has happened. But it could be relevant going into the future where we have similar diseases cropping up. And hopefully not, but the possibility is there. Particular criticism is levied against New York City, which has America's largest outbreak and deaths. They believe that rather than being an 80%, it could have been a 50% fatality rate if quarantine and isolation measures had been implemented on March 22nd. This is then compared to other states which have shown a more proactive nature and others that have been less proactive. This is around the same time that a lot of other countries, states, and similar are looking to relax their social distancing measures. Some countries may well be in a position where it is safe to do so. Others may not be. But it's important to keep that in mind when you consider what would happen if they choose not to do so or do so too early. This could lead to a rolling series of social distancing measures until 2022, according to Harvard. That would be periods where social distancing was enforced, possibly not lockdowns, but certainly strong restrictions on the free movement of people. The Harvard researchers are concerned this could become a seasonal disease, similar to influenza, but with a higher transmission rate in the winter months, and possibly a higher fatality rate. This would mean each year during winter, social distancing measures would have to be put into effect to maintain safety and public health. The rationale behind a series of rolling social distancing measures is that it would allow a societal buildup of immunity. It would give medical services time to ramp up and increase their capacity for urgent needs resulting from the CCP virus. If it was maintained indefinitely, social distancing would prevent that social and public immunity. This creates a two-edged sword. Too early, and the disease will remain entrenched in society. If the social distancing measures are carried on for too long, then nobody develops an immunity. In order to create the delicate balance between the two, until a vaccine or treatment comes out, the rolling social distancing measures are the best solution. The Harvard researchers believe that the CCP virus is here to stay, and it's unlikely it will burn out like the SARS outbreak of 2002. The 2002 outbreak was actually an example of the World Health Organization doing their job well. They took China to task over the cover-up, they rolled out massive efforts to try and contain it, and they put a lot of effort into managing it. Comparing that to the CCP virus that we are dealing with today, the World Health Organization has failed at multiple levels and embarrassed itself. So much so that there is a significant petition to have the head of the World Health Organization removed from their position. For many of the same reasons, President Trump is looking to halt funding to the World Health Organization. As President Trump put it, with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have deep concerns whether America's generosity has been put to the best use possible. This concern is legitimate based on internal audits of the World Health Organization. The team responsible for monitoring this disease was drastically underfunded, under-resourced, and understaffed. While that's occurring on that end of the system, those who are in positions of authority and decision-making, such as Tedros, have been given 5-star luxury vacations to a variety of countries with first-class flights and all manner of trappings on top. That's where their money was going, to ensuring those at the top of the pyramid who were decision makers and have made bad decisions were being given the best possible treatment, while those who are doing the work and trying to make the world a better place, as per the World Health Organization's goals, were not being funded, not being employed, and not being resourced. Annually, America contributes between $400 million and $500 million. Compare this to China, who seems to have an undue amount of influence with the World Health Organization, and they donate about $40 million a year. The World Health Organization appears to have sided with China in every regard, whether that is denying human-to-human transmission initially, dismissing the idea of preventing travel between countries, denying human-to-animal transmission, denying the disease is pandemic-worthy. Many issues that could have been prevented if China had had less influence over the World Health Organization. In fact, many of the items just mentioned were raised by Taiwan early on, but the World Health Organization dismissed it. They argued that since China did not recognize these possible things and were not reporting them, Taiwan's reports were not correct, because Taiwan is part of China as far as the World Health Organization is concerned. The Chinese authorities have failed to share data and statistics from China to the World Health Organization and have resisted at every turn intervention and support from them. Despite this, the World Health Organization has praised China repeatedly. We've all seen, to some extent, the economic and social impact of the CCP virus. And one study has tried to model how one person in a store, an office space, or similar enclosed environment could possibly spread the CCP virus by coughing. It involved the use of a computer simulated model, and researchers in Finland. What they found is not encouraging and does promote the idea of not just social distancing, but isolation. The example they use in the video available travels between aisles within a store and infects someone on the other side of shelves. Other experts have looked at this and judged it rather critically, arguing that those at greatest risk are normally within a meter, maybe two, and that accounts for most infections. But both the original researchers and the critics admit that there's little known about both the spread of the CCP virus and how much or how little it takes to become infected. As we've mentioned, the World Health Organization is supposed to have been rather central to the CCP virus investigation, spread, and control. Well, now they're finally getting around to investigating the possibility of reinfection after 19 patients have been identified as testing positive for the CCP virus after recovering. This is something that has been proposed repeatedly over the last few months, and the World Health Organization continues to dismiss it. They're looking at it again now after South Korea reported that 91 of their patients who were thought to have recovered from the CCP virus were testing positive again. That's a not insignificant number, and South Korea has achieved a lot of success in controlling its spread, primarily owing to their experience from the SARS outbreak of 2002. South Korean officials believe it may not necessarily be a case of reinfection, but a reactivation of the virus. The difference is subtle but important. One is that the virus has gone into hiding and can come back, similar to the way that shingles is a re-emergence of the chickenpox virus. It's simply been suppressed, and once that suppression goes away, the disease returns. Considering that we are fast approaching, if not by the time this video is published, moved over the threshold of 2 million infected, that could be a real problem if the disease is either reinfecting people or re-emerging. Either way, it means it won't be going away without a vaccine. Fortunately, this week, we appear to have considerably more news in line with the purpose of this series. One of these is about a 33-year-old Irish man who was injecting himself with his own semen in an effort to remove his chronic lower back pain. Yes, for some bizarre reason, he was under the impression that injecting his own semen into the veins and muscles of his right arm would resolve his lower back pain. They're two very different parts of the body, and we are confused. Very, very confused. The Irishman presented himself to the hospital in Dublin following several days of pain and finding that his right arm was red and swollen. The doctors identified this as the signs of a rather significant subcutaneous or below-skin infection. This was confirmed through an X-ray which found an abscess under his skin, The patient eventually admitted that it was probably owing to his unusual healthy regime. We use the word regime purely because he had been doing it monthly for about 18 months, and that he had increased the dose to several injections after his back pain had started. No doubt, this unusual situation is why the patient discharged themselves after being given intravenous antimicrobials. Sadly, that means we won't know why he was doing it or where he got this idea from, but yeah. In less bizarre news, we could possibly be getting a safer alternative to opioids. This could be done by modifying and doctoring tarantula venom. Opioids are well known for their highly addictive nature and toxicity. Tarantula venom could possibly avoid at least the addictive element. It's a neurotoxin and it comes out of the tarantula called the Chinese bird spider. It works through a peptide that inhibits the ability of the sodium channels that are needed for neurons to transmit the sensation of pain. No sodium channels means no sensation. This particular news item is an example of why we need biodiversity. If we are going to try and find new treatments for diseases, new drugs, and more, it's simply not viable for us to try and synthesize every possible compound and recreate them. Finding them in nature like this will allow us to do what we need to do in finding new treatments that will overcome some of the barriers faced in current, well-used drugs that have significant side effects. In astronomy-related news, it has been announced that SpaceX has been given the go-ahead at last to take 2 American astronauts to the ISS. This will be using SpaceX technology, which has had a bit of a rocky history to it. But on the 27th of May, they will be launching from America, using American-built technology from an American base. Since 2011, America has been relying on the Soyuz rockets, built in Russia, to get their astronauts to space. In recent years, there's been a greater push to not rely on Russia so heavily. This has led to a competition between SpaceX, Boeing, and a few other companies to provide the necessary resources, facilities, and equipment to get astronauts to space. This will be the flight of the Crew Dragon capsule, which is a modified version of SpaceX's other cargo capsule. It's had a rather rocky history so far, but with this launch, they will prove that SpaceX is capable of delivering equipment and astronauts to space. In technology-related news, and disturbing news at that, Google engineers have created an AI that will mutate, which then allows it to create systems faster than a human could possibly hope to code. This is otherwise known as Skynet. The system is called AutoML, or Automatic Machine Learning System. It is by itself a rather spectacular system, assuming it's not involved in any way, shape, or form with the YouTube algorithm, in which case it's a failure of monumental proportions. The system works through a kind of Darwinian natural selection. That is, it starts with a large selection of algorithms. It tests these through a trial and error system. It then identifies those that have been most successful, retains them, modifies them slightly to perform better in theory, repeats the testing process, and continues to do so, trying to improve upon these retained algorithms each time. It's nothing unusual in and of itself. Humans do that quite regularly with programs. The advantage to this system, and the somewhat terrifying element, is that it can run these processes 10,000 times per second per processor that is used for it. That is a drastic increase over what other systems have been able to do in the past, and it produces far better results. There is further interesting news on academic publishing. An examination of researchers in Australia found that a disconcerting number were not aware that their names were being used in association with predatory publishers and journals. This can be found in Nature Index, and as the byline reads, 1 in 4 said they were not aware of their names being used, and this was in relation to predatory journals. They looked at 3,700 researchers at various Australian institutions. Their names were found in a variety of publishers' websites, and it accounts for about 7% of the Australian academic community. That means about 7% of the country has found their names tied into questionable, if not outright scam-filled publishers. A surprising percentage of the academics involved had no idea of their participation, or at least supposed participation. A further and somewhat more disconcerting proportion deny that there is a problem, and that it's simply not an established journal, or similar arguments to downplay the problems involved. It could be said that at least there is some possible avenue for these journals to develop and enter into a legitimate arrangement. The same can't be said of the GOOP lab. That is, GOOP's Netflix series. For whatever reason, Netflix has decided to give Gwyneth Paltrow the ability to spread her pseudoscience and woo on their service. We've mentioned GOOP before, given its rather checkered history of honesty and, well, outright nonsense. It has been quite heavily criticized as a result of that history, and that it's continuing to hold similar content in the Netflix series. Whether that is going from psychedelic drugs to could you possibly be psychic? A lot of the time it seems as though the people behind the GOOP series have been taking far too many psychedelic drugs, trying to use it as therapy for themselves, and then creating a lot of nonsense. Unfortunately, its criticism has not been as effective as you might hope, and it seems unlikely that Netflix will do away with the series entirely. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.